Welcome to Literacy Matters Empowered Conversations. I'm your host, Dr. Cheryl Lundy Swift. Now, listeners, you are in for a real treat. I am super excited to talk with the creator of the writing rope, Joan Sedita. Joan Sedita is the founder and CEO of Keys to Literacy, where she leads the development of research-based literacy professional development programs used nationwide. She's the creator of the Writing Rope framework and the lead author of several widely used instructional resources, including Keys to Content Writing, the Key Comprehension Routine, and Keys to Beginning Reading. Joan is a sought-after national consultant, speaker, and author, and continues to work closely with educators and state agencies to improve literacy instruction across all grade levels. Joan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Cheryl, for giving me this opportunity to talk about one of my favorite topics, writing, and the best ways to teach it.
Yes, yes, yes. I can't tell you how just so excited I am to talk to you. We've been talking about the reading rope kind of almost ad nauseum, right? People know, people have heard about Hollis Scarborough's work, and we thank God for her, all that she's done to really bring reading kind of to the forefront, and we use that framework to talk about how to support teachers and students when it comes to teaching and learning to read. But the writing rope may not be as popular. So for those who are new to your work, can you just walk us through what that writing rope is and why you even created it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Back in 2018, I felt that there was a need to help teachers, give teachers and other educators a framework, right, about writing. You know, ever since the National Reading Panel came out almost 25 years ago, right?
Yeah.
You know, if you ask most elementary teachers and certainly anybody in any grade who's involved in literacy, if you say, well, what are the components of reading, right? And, you hold up your five fingers and you go, and, you say, what are they? Oh, phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, comprehension, right? Of course, oral language, wraps itself around all that. But when it comes to writing, very often teachers can't give you that answer. If they teach young ones, they say it's spelling or handwriting. If they teach in upper grades, they'll say, oh, it's about responding to a prompt on a high stakes test. And for years, I've often thought that we could use a framework like that. Now, I also for years used to use a different kind of metaphor. I used to talk about a wagon wheel, and that like spokes in a wheel, if any spokes are broken, meaning any components of writing instruction, then it's going to affect kids' writing. But back in 2018, when I wanted to kind of write this article, that was a time when Dr. Scarborough's rope was really taking off. I mean, it's been around since 2001, and I thought, well, you know what? I think a similar metaphor to that might be easier for people to relate to. So that's why I ended up switching over to that. But that's the whole idea of it, right? That writing is a whole collection of skills and strategies and techniques, and proficient writers integrate them all at the same time when they're writing, right?
Sure.
But for instructional purposes, we need to break those out. What are all those skills and strategies? And that's what the writing rope framework does. So I organized it into 5 strands, components. Transcription is the first, writing craft is the next, text structure is the third, syntax and sentences, and then critical thinking. And then within each of those strands, there are a whole host of other sub skills and subcategories, if you will. And we can talk about them, we can teach them individually, but ultimately, like with fluency with reading, our students need to get good at all of them, and more importantly, bring them together like you do in a row. So, that's it in a kind of a nutshell. I see that it's being used by folks. Well, let me point out, it's not a program. It's not a curriculum, right? It's a framework. It's a model. And I see folks using it in different ways, teachers and administrators, to look at whatever writing curriculum they have. Maybe they're using a writing program. Maybe in the elementary grades, they're using a core reading program that, says or claims that it has writing in it. the rope can let you look at whatever, you are using for writing and analyze, does it cover everything it needs to?
Sure.
It's what I'm doing to teach writing, hitting all the major categories. I see other teachers use it in some respects as a framework for assessing students' writing. So if you have a student sample piece of writing, you can look at all the items in the rope and say, gee, what are their sentences like?
Sure.
Do they have well-crafted paragraphs? Do they have they developed the body structure for informational differently than maybe opinion or argument? So it can be used in lots of ways.
When you thought about building this, did you have an intention in mind for how teachers or administrators or literacy coaches were to use it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that first explanation that I gave, which is to just make sure that whatever you're doing to teach writing, that you're covering everything you need to.
Sure.
And it really, and it does, it pretty much covers everything. Sometimes folks will say, well, gee, why did you put this over in this section, or why did you put that over there? That's just, it's more, I don't know, the way my mind organizes things.
Sure.
But I will say every skill and strategy, and especially in writing craft, you get more techniques, right?
Right.
Um, they're all backed by research. Like, these are all things that we know need to be taught, and that we need to give explicit instruction
Sure.
for kids to learn these things. So it's more just a way of organizing it and structuring it. And I cover broader text structures, like what's the difference between different types of writing, informational, narrative, argument. But we also talk about paragraph structure. What is a paragraph? It's
Sure.
built around the main idea. Patterns of organization, description versus cause and effect, right? Versus, compare and contrast. And then transitions, words like however, therefore, first, second. We know that when we teach kids about text structure, it supports their reading comprehension.
Yeah.
And they obviously need to learn that in order to write. So this is another place where, and this can happen in any subject, you're in science class, you're about to read something in the science textbook. So you take a moment to unpack with the students, what's the structure going on here?
Sure.
How did the author use paragraphs? Ooh, do you see any transition words? And then soon after, when the kids are writing about what they just learned in science, you ask them to include those same structures. Another example is sentences. Anything we do to support sentence writing,
Yeah.
sentence combining, sentence elaboration, sentence scrambles, right? It helps kids write better, more elaborated sentences. It develops their syntactic awareness of grammar, but it also supports their reading comprehension, because one of the reasons kids have difficulty understanding is when they run across a big, long, complex sentence, they can't unpack it, right?
Sure.
So those are just a few examples of the many ways that certain skill instruction will support both reading and writing.
I love those real practical examples, like the sentence scrambles that you mentioned for sure. So, what does this look like when it comes to writing and composing for our younger students, like our K-3 students? What should that look like?
Yeah, that's another good question. And the Writing Rote book, which was published by Brooks, is sort of an overview of that framework, right? And I tried to bring in some practical suggestions, teaching suggestions for each skill in the different strands. And I cover broader text structures, like what's the difference between different types of writing, informational, narrative, argument. But we also talk about paragraph structure. What is a paragraph? It's built around the main idea. Patterns of organization, description versus cause and effect, right? Versus, compare and contrast. And then transitions, words like however, therefore, first, second. We know that when we teach kids about text structure, it supports their reading comprehension.
Yeah.
And they obviously need to learn that in order to write. So this is another place where, and this can happen in any subject, you're in science class, you're about to read something in the science textbook. So you take a moment to unpack with the students, what's the structure going on here?
Sure.
How did the author use paragraphs? Ooh, do you see any transition words? And then soon after, when the kids are writing about what they just learned in science, you ask them to include those same structures. Another example is sentences. Anything we do to support sentence writing,
Yeah.
sentence combining, sentence elaboration, sentence scrambles, right? It helps kids write better, more elaborated sentences. It develops their syntactic awareness of grammar, but it also supports their reading comprehension, because one of the reasons kids have difficulty understanding is when they run across a big, long, complex sentence, they can't unpack it, right?
Sure.
So those are just a few examples of the many ways that certain skill instruction will support both reading and writing.
I love those real practical examples, like the sentence scrambles that you mentioned for sure.
Proficient writers are always thinking about that, and it should influence choices you make about the words you're going to use, about the structure, the tone you're going to have. And so that's a real writing craft sort of thing. And a lot of our students just are not aware about that as well. Yeah, there's a lot I could say about struggling older writers, but I think just trying to analyze where the issue is, where are the breakdown points.
Yeah. And I'll
So
tell you what, you hit the nail on the head as a former ELA teacher and former principal. Where we had the most difficulty, you're absolutely right, is sentences. And so I think that focus to really support that syntax is incredibly important, and then to build to the paragraphs. I think, again, I can hear a lot of teachers going, "Yep, amen to that," right? So thank you. When you mentioned this idea of a proficient writer, what does it mean to you to be proficient and fluent and flexible as a writer?
what it means is to be able to use writing to express yourself, right? Also to use writing to learn, and we should talk about that a little bit, because a lot of that's tied to that critical thinking strand of the rope. But it's to use writing to express yourself, to communicate with others, using writing to learn, which is really important in school, right?
Yeah.
Um, but we also can use writing to explore our thoughts and our feelings. Think about people who write journals. Nobody else ever sees it. It's for themselves to think
Right.
through an issue, think through a problem.
Yeah.
And without spending too much time on it, I just finished writing an article about AI in the age of, or teaching writing or learning to write in the age of AI. And I mean, there's a lot we could say about it, but one of the big things that we want to remind our students, because AI is here and they're going to be using it, right?
Yep.
But that use it in a way that will help you learn to be a better writer. Don't let it do the writing for you, right? There's this
Right.
old adage, like the one who does the work does the learning.
Yep.
And when it comes to writing about what we're reading, writing to learn, writing about what we're learning in science or math or history, right? It's that critical thinking that goes into, if you're writing from sources, figuring out what's the important thing I want to pull from that source.
Yeah.
It's critical thinking that's tied to your brainstorming about what do I have to say about this? What else do I need to learn about this? Then, and that's all at the thinking stage of the writing process, right?
Cool.
Then at the planning stage, now it's like, well, I've got to gather that and hold it somewhere. So I'm going to take some notes. That means we have to teach kids how to take notes, right?
Sure. Sure.
And then I'm going to look at those notes and say, oh, there's all these ideas and all this information that I want to say, how am I going to organize it? And that's where we need to teach them a tool, an outline, a graphic organizer to plan the structure. That's where instruction about text structure comes in. What does an introduction do? What does a conclusion do? And if we let our kids, let the AI do all of that for them, and all they do is kind of read it over and fix it up, we've just deprived them of that opportunity to use writing to learn. Now, you can't just say to kids, do a research paper. Like you have to teach them all of those skills. You have
Yeah.
to give strategies for each one. But that's really, I think, a proficient writer has learned all of those things so that they can use writing as a tool.
That's great. And I love that you mentioned, I mean, AI is here to stay and it can certainly be leveraged, but we can never have it do the writing for us. I have leaned into AI a little more and I feel like it is making me a stronger writer, but I'm not dependent upon it, right? I look at it and oftentimes it takes my own writing and go, that was great. So it's also confirming for us sometimes as well.
Well, listen, one of the things it can do, and I've talked with several folks who are in the field of dyslexia and learning disabilities, right? That's where I got my start teaching. And as it relates to things like checking spelling, grammar, punctuation, those are the things that cause real problems for kids with dyslexia and dysgraphia, right?
Mm,
And we also know from research, there's lots of things that will help motivate kids or take away their motivation. And, one of the things we know is that, especially as kids get older, if they feel like they can't spell a word, they hold back on their writing because they're too embarrassed, it's too hard. They're putting all their energy into those transcription skills. They can't focus on composing. So I think for our kids that have those kinds of disabilities, and even our English learners, right, who haven't yet developed strong grammar, these are ways that AI can level the playing field for these kids so that they can focus on expressing what they have to say and that higher level of text structure and critical thinking and writing
sure.
without that worry about, oh, it's going to be full of spelling errors.
Right, right. So true, so very. Huh. I got chills thinking about that for just a second. So this has been a great conversation. I would love for you to leave our listeners with one empowering message for them, like whether they're teachers or school leaders or families, just about writing. What would you say to them?
Yeah, I might be a couple things, but
You,
first of
you can
all,
you can share more than one.
that we all need to acknowledge that writing is hard. It is difficult. Even authors have a hard time, right?
Yeah,
And a lot of times our students just think, oh, well, that comes so easy to other people, right? I can't ever do that. And we need to say that it's a struggle for everybody.
yeah,
And that leads us into, some things that are associated with one of the recommendations from an IES research report that did a meta-analysis of effective writing instruction for younger kids, right, and elementary kids. And one of the four recommendations was that we need to develop a community of writers. And there's
mm,
lots of things that go into that, but one of them is creating a safe place, a place where kids feel it's okay that if I didn't spell this right, or I didn't write the sentence right, or maybe my idea isn't quite explained, that's okay because everybody else is having the same problem.
yeah,
It's a place where we let kids collaborate with one another to share their thinking at all stages of the writing process. And I guess the other thing I'd say, the important thing as it relates to learning in school and overall achievement, let's not forget how powerful writing can be to help learn. Lots of studies on that. A great report called Writing to Read, research report,
yeah.
kind of highlights all of that. But and if we recognize that writing is just as important as reading, then we must find time throughout the school day to have kids write, because they're not going to get good at it if they don't have a chance to practice.